Okay, everyone, thanks for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us here on the third episode of the Hunt Institute's new webinar series, Conversations with State Chiefs. We're really thrilled today to be joined by Senior Chancellor Eric Hall of Florida, Commissioner Penny Schwinn of Tennessee, Commissioner Mcgrath of Texas, and Secretary John King, President and CEO of the Education Trust and former U.S. Secretary of Education. Our first two episodes, which were on April 29th and May 5th, featured chiefs from North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Idaho, Wyoming, and North Dakota, as well as Dan Weisberg, the CEO of TNTP, and Dr. Carissa Miller, the Executive Director of CCSSO. If you missed those conversations, you can find the recaps as well as some recordings on the Hunt Institute website. After our welcoming remarks, we'll hear from our panelists for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to pivot to a Q&A. If you have any questions throughout the discussion, please feel free to submit them into the Q&A feature. We'll have someone sending those along so that we can ask them of the chiefs. And be sure to include your name, title, and organization so that we can give you proper credit. And one last note before we get started, we'd love to hear from you on social media during our conversations today. If you tweet about today's episode, please use the hashtag StateChiefsConvo. You can also use that to follow along with other attendees and also see information from past webinars. I'd now like to quickly turn it over to the Hunt Institute's President and CEO, Dr. Javed Siddiqui, who is going to provide some brief welcoming remarks.
Thanks, Julia. First of all, I want to thank all of our wonderful panelists, Commissioner Mcgrath, Commissioner Penny Schwinn, Senior Chancellor Eric Hall, and Mr. Secretary, Secretary John King. Thank you to all of you. I know how crazy busy all of you are leading your state organizations, and John, your national organization. Appreciate you making time to be with us. We think this is a important part of the work we're doing is to continue to engage folks in our response to this pandemic. With that in mind, we want to ensure district and school leaders, teachers were encouraged to engage in this series. As all of you know, this year our teachers and our leaders have truly stepped up to continue serving our students in ways we would never have imagined merely a few months back. So I want to thank all of them for what they're doing for our students and thank them for taking time out of their schedules. I know we have countless superintendents, principals, and teachers that have joined us today. I think we had to increase our Zoom license. I didn't know if it was Mr. Secretary or Commissioner Mcgrath, because they say everything's bigger in Texas, so we had to increase our Zoom license for this specific one. It probably is just the third iteration of people catching on to this great series. So I want to again thank all of you for helping us convene and bring folks together from across your three states and certainly across the country. So that in mind, as Julia mentioned, this is chapter 3 of the Conversation with State Chiefs webinars. It's really been an exciting opportunity for us to bring state chiefs together. I think we have 2 more already planned, and we're building out. The hope is to be able to run the entire country of state chiefs, and hopefully we'll keep this conversation going even post this COVID-19 pandemic, because we've already learned some important lessons. I think your colleagues, to our commissioners, have learned from each other. So this could be a great opportunity for us to continue this work moving forward, and hope you will continue consider keeping us engaged in this manner moving forward. Finally, the Hunt Institute does, this is something we care deeply about, making sure educators, policymakers have access to the best experts, policies, practices across the country. So if there's anything we can do for any of you on this Zoom, please do reach out to Julia or anybody on our team. We're happy to answer any questions you may have and may not get answered this afternoon. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to you, Julia. Thanks for all you've done for this, and let's get this conversation going.
Yeah, thanks so much, Javed. And so I'm just going to jump right in. And first, we're so excited to have with us today the President and CEO of the Education Trust, Secretary John King. And Secretary King, can you give us a brief overview of some of the existing inequities in standards and accountability, and how they're really being brought to the forefront by COVID-19 school closures? And also, what are some of the best practices we've seen for eliminating those inequities?
Sure. Well, thanks for the opportunity to join you all for this conversation, and so grateful for the leadership of state chiefs in this challenging moment. So honored to join this panel. The context we have to remember around assessment is that it wasn't that long ago that whole groups of students were essentially rendered invisible because we didn't have meaningful accountability for outcomes. And so it's really only in the last couple of decades that we've had systems in place where we pay close attention to the performance of African American students, Latino students, English learners, students with disabilities, and have a real picture on the progress that students are or aren't making each year. And that's critical. We need that. We also need information for teachers and parents about kids learning each year. Are they making progress? Where are there holes in their learning? What kinds of supports do they need after school in the summer? How do we ensure that the teacher of the next grade is in a position to tailor instruction to their needs? So assessments and accountability are part of our overall strategy for ensuring education equity. They are necessary, certainly not sufficient, but an important part. This year has created incredible challenges. Obviously, there was no choice really but to cancel this year's annual assessments as a result of COVID-19. Nonetheless, when students come back, we're going to need diagnostic assessments to figure out where kids are and what supports they need. And I'm sure each of our state chiefs will talk about their plan for this, but we'll need to have good information so that we can tailor supports. We anticipate that there'll be learning loss. NWEA, for example, did a study showing that students may lose as much as half of a year of progress in math, a third of a year or more in reading. So we're going to need to make up that ground. We're going to need teachers to tailor instruction. We're going to need intensive tutoring. We're going to need extended learning time. And we'll know what we need based on those diagnostic assessments. We also next year will need to get back into a regular series of annual assessments so that we have good, high quality information about where gaps are and what to do about them. But ultimately, what I hope most, and I hope we'll get into this in this conversation, is that the assessments are just a part of a broader effort to ensure high quality educational experiences for every student. We need high quality curricula that are aligned with evidence about how students learn. We need teachers who are well prepared and well supported. We need school environments that are safe and supportive and nurturing, and that address some of the trauma that students will have experienced from missing so much school or from being in homes where there are challenges from abuse to domestic violence to addiction. So we have to think holistically about what school should look like, but remember that assessments and good information about student learning is a part of what doing school right looks like.
Thank you so much. That's such a great intro to get us into this. And so next I'm going to bring us to Chancellor Eric Hall, Senior Chancellor of Education in Florida. And Chancellor Hall, can you talk about what Florida is doing now and plans to do long-term to rethink accountability standards, particularly as it relates to these issues of equity that Secretary King just talked about that have been exacerbated right now?
Definitely. And again, glad to be here with you. And it's an honor to be on this panel and to kind of be engaged in this conversation. I mean, I would just kind of start by giving some context, about Florida in general. I mean, it's the third largest state in the nation. We're just shy of 3 million students. And our students are, extremely diverse. 63% of our students are actually minority. And we've got 34% of our students are Hispanic, 22% Black. We have 10% that are English language learners, and 63% that are living in low-income homes. So we have to, think intentionally about the work that we're going to do in this period of time. Piggybacking on the conversation just now with the Secretary, we have to pay attention to all these elements and look at assessment data. And Florida's been a national leader in accountability in what we've done with assessments. And I think it's important to kind of tease out that accountability, it's not this tool to punish, but it's a tool to get data and information so that we can prepare our teachers, our school leaders, our parents on best how to respond and support the needs of each individual child. And I think in this period of time, as we're all faced with COVID-19 and trying to look at the tools and strategies that we can deploy to best support our schools, it's going to be critical that this not be a retreat from accountability and standards, but more about digging in and making big bets on the efforts and strategies we have to do to really, close these and accelerate the closure of these achievement gaps that we're concerned that have been exacerbated from COVID-19. And so, we're leaning heavily on our teachers. We're going to make our big bets on our educators that are committed and doing the work day in and day out, our school leaders and our superintendents that have really, turned on a dime to go from, brick and mortar school buildings to providing distance learning. And I'll dive into that a little bit more later. But again, I think, we're pretty proud as a state about the work that's been done, but there is no doubt that, again, the achievement gap issues and the concerns that, we know that we're going to have to just dig in and really, be intentional about. Accountability and standards are going to be at the forefront of that work. Safety and health first and foremost. How do we create the conditions to ensure that, in our schools and for, our students and our staff? But, right behind that is going to be, what are we going to do to make all of our big bets around closing the achievement gaps and accelerating, the learning that needs to take place to close these gaps that we're concerned about, just like all my other colleagues that are on today's call. So looking forward to today's dialogue, and we're going to continue, here in Florida, to remain focused on those gaps and look at how we use assessment to drive instruction and use some of those diagnostic tools, and really working through our CARES Act plan currently, with our school leaders, our district leaders, engaging with parents through survey, getting their feedback so that we're creating the conditions for success when we finally reopen the doors of our school campuses and get our students back in front of the great teachers that are going to be really and truly, they're going to be the wizards that are going to close these gaps. And we want to make sure we prepare and build their capacity to do so. And so I think when our CARES Act plan rolls out, you're going to see a lot of our big bets placed around those areas.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Hall. And next we're going to go to Commissioner Mcgrath, Texas Commissioner of Education. And Commissioner Mcgrath, can you talk a little bit similarly about what Texas is doing now and is thinking about doing in the summer and fall to think about these accountability standards?
Well, I would say the first thing is we recognize that our parents are our child's first teacher, which is a sort of truism that has hit us all in the face very clearly during this time period. As a parent with 4 young kids at my own house, it is the deep appreciation for quality instruction and teaching, as well as just recognizing the prime role of parents in the driver's seat of their kids' education. We can't forget that fact as we work to create schools that are as supportive as possible for all of our kids. And so one of the things that we have done is we've gotten some requests, a demand as it were, both from educators and from parents themselves to gain insight into how well their students are faring in the current environment. So later today, we'll actually be announcing that parents in Texas can log in and have their children complete an optional end-of-year assessment to find out exactly how much knowledge and skills they've gained in their core academic areas over the course of the year. Mom can run this, in the living room online, and it's freely available to every single Texas parent, and districts as well are opting in at a pretty large scale to try to use this from a diagnostic perspective. There's been a great deal of concern about the COVID slide among educators, and the NWEA projected out the sort of normal summer slide if it went all the way back to, say, March 15th. And it's significant and a deep challenge that will affect families inequitably and students inequitably. But we need to make sure that our role as a SEA is to ensure that we help our school systems have access to the best tooling possible to get diagnostic information on their kids. Now, that information in and of itself doesn't do anything. It's sort of like if you go to the doctor and the doctor says, well, I have diagnosed you with ulcerative colitis, and then you leave. It's like that doctor didn't help me much. What do I do? How do I build an action plan to improve my reading or mathematics proficiency, to grow in every way that I can grow as a child? So we want to ensure that as we provide effective diagnostic resources, that we provide effective action planning resources, again, both for educators and for parents themselves who are clearly in the driver's seat of this every day, but even more so today. So this is, I think, one of the key things that's in terms of what we're focused on as an SEA, more so than just like, putting up a score at the end of the game, which is, I think, a more traditionalist approach to accountability. This this process that we go through is about creating a growth mindset, a culture of continuous improvement. We recognize we don't live in a utopia now, and not everybody is getting the support and service that we think that they are all morally entitled to. The question is can we be reflective on where our kids are now, and can we build action plans so that what we do to support them next week is stronger than what we did to support them last week? So this is really our sort of primary MO, at least on that topic. But I would say there's a lot of other stuff going on as we try to respond to this crisis. It gets far beyond that core question, and I guess we can get to that later on in the discussion.
Thank you so much, and that's really interesting information, and I think will be that diagnostic will be really helpful for a lot of people. And so finally, we're going to hear from Commissioner Penny Schwinn, our Tennessee's Commissioner of Education. And Commissioner Schwinn, can you also talk a little bit about what Tennessee is doing both now and in the future in terms of equitable accountability and learning standards, and what issues you're thinking about the most?
Yeah, sure. So I would echo a lot of the comments that we just heard. And I think I would start with some of the engagement that we've done on the front end to make sure that any of the work that we're doing as a state agency is informed by the stakeholders that we're here to serve. So for the last 6 weeks plus, we have 3 times a week calls with every superintendent in the state, plus anyone on their senior teams that they want to bring on board. In addition to that, our core or regional offices are spending time doing one-on-one individualized support with districts to be able to get an understanding of the needs assessment, given the we have everything from Memphis and Nashville to very, very rural and distressed counties in the state of Tennessee. And so we understand that the solution cannot be a one-size-fits-all state solution. We are going to have to be very individualized and personalized in the ways that we think about supporting the 147 different LEAs that we have in the state. And so I think those regional supports have been incredibly important. I think the second thing is with that, those 3 times a week calls, and then certainly we have weekly communication that goes out to a variety of different stakeholder groups. In that, what we found is that there's pretty remarkable consistency in the feedback that we're getting around the needs assessment. So we're hearing a lot about technology and access and how varied that is across the state, not just for our students, but frankly also for our educators. Not all of our educators have technology and access to the internet at home. So some of the solutions that we're thinking about have to create levels of equity, opportunity, and access for everyone within the system. So we're thinking broadly about that. We've heard a lot about special populations and have really been taking different ways and approaches of addressing that. The most recent thing is that we put out a $1 million assistive technology grant. We'll have 2 or 3 other big announcements happening over the next 4 weeks specific to children with disabilities, and then other grants and opportunities related to children who speak languages other than English. Understanding those are 2 big groups that our districts want to make sure that they are supporting, and we have seen that there are gaps in their ability to do that kind of support. Mental health has been incredibly significant in terms of our conversations. We have a child wellbeing task force where some big announcements will happen over the next 4 days related to what that looks like at a state scale. Again, wanting to make sure that all of our different localities are able to provide feedback up and then also back down, so that we are not trying to do, again, a one-size-fits-all across a very diverse state. And then blended learning. Many of our districts, we have everything from one-to-one with online learning available from the word go. And then we have other districts who are literally, people are having to walk up or drive up. We're doing packets, we're trying to return packets, and the logistics related to that. I say all of that because I think that this is a crisis situation, and we've been in one for now 2 months. Going into next year, we don't have that same level of excuse on ourselves as a state to be able to say this is unexpected. We have some level of prediction about what is going to happen or what could happen. So our work right now is about creating all of the different pathways that might be true for districts who are in more urban environments. Those are suburban, those are town, those are rural. We need to make sure that we have solutions for all of those. One of the things that we are doing is we'll have a free benchmark diagnostic that will be available for every single school and district in the state that they can opt into. It will be a short form version of what the summative test would look like. It is not evaluative. It is not about trying to kind of overly test students when they're coming back in. We know there's a strong reopening that has to do with the whole child component, and that has to be prioritized. Safety, health, and mental health of children will be first in the state of Tennessee, regardless of any other conversation. after we come back and after we're in a space where we've been able to kind of normalize this new normal or whatever that looks like for students. We do know that our educators deserve to have information about all of the children in their classroom so that they can more effectively teach them and know what gaps may or may not exist. You know, you have a student who has 2 educator parents at home who might be getting a full days of instruction every day, and then you have another child who maybe is 3 doors down who isn't getting that same level of instruction. And so those 2 children might be sitting next door to each other in the same classroom, 6 feet apart or whatever it ends up looking like. We need to make sure that we have the right information and data to address whatever needs they have and to accelerate them. We certainly don't want students who are progressing as they normally would have to be sitting in a classroom for 6 or 7 months repeating information they've already mastered. So the complexities around this, I think, are pretty significant. And we are thinking from the perspective of our principals and our educators about what they will have in the classrooms and knowing how, I think, how much they want to be able to support that student learning. And then the last thing that I would say, just from kind of the state of Tennessee's perspective, is that we know that we have to really front load on the delivery chain of this information. So we have a needs assessment. We know we're going to have better data and good data about what is happening in classrooms. And now with that planning perspective and building in kind of what that looks like at the school and the district level, we need to start providing really strong supports for our educators for what they are doing across the board. So we just rolled out, in partnership with the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, a program where 700 principals, almost half the principals in the state, are doing distance learning. They're doing a cohort, a series of modules related to what it's like to be a principal in a distance learning environment. We'll have a big announcement related to teachers in the state and some free opportunities there, but we want to front load that as much as possible now and give our districts time to provide supports over the summer.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists. Those were all really great insights and already gave me a ton of ideas. And so now I'm going to move forward into some Q&A. And I'm going to start with a few questions that we've already gotten from the audience. I've seen that there have been a ton submitted already, which is great. But if you haven't submitted yours, please feel free to go ahead and do so. And we will try to get to as many as we can. I want to start with Secretary King. Secretary King, can you discuss the role that assessments play in our current situation? I think we've kind of touched on this a little bit with our other panelists, but how do we think about assessments differently as a result of this, and how do we factor that into our standards moving forward?
Yeah, well, it's heartening to hear the plan in Texas and Tennessee around making available diagnostic assessments that will help families and teachers get a sense of where students are. I would also ask us all to think beyond just the kind of traditional academic assessment to what's other information that we ought to have. We ought to know, are students attending the distance learning classes? Are they participating in the distance learning projects and assignments that they're getting, whether those are pencil and paper or online? And districts ought to be tracking that information so they know if they are students who are missing the opportunity to continue their learning during this period. We want to know how students are doing. Are they getting food? Are they doing okay socio-emotionally? I think about the Phoenix Union School District in Arizona that has a Every Student Every Day initiative to make sure that an adult with the school district is in touch with every kid every day to check on them, and also to get information that can come back to Central about kids who need additional support, whether that's around accessing food or accessing bandwidth or accessing learning opportunities. There's information that we need about our high school students and whether they're staying on track on the path to post-secondary education. There are worrying signs that FAFSA completion is down. So we got to see that as a data point. How do we make sure that the FAFSA is getting completed by all of our seniors? How do we make sure that all of our seniors are in touch with their potential college or post-secondary training program so that they aren't lost over this summer, that we don't see an uptick in summer melt. And then are there opportunities to accelerate, not just remediate, but move students forward? I think about Northern Virginia Community College, which has committed to offer online summer classes this summer to high school juniors and seniors throughout their region so that students have an opportunity to get ahead and take interesting college courses. And if they can succeed in those courses, that tells us a lot about whether or not they are on track to college and career success. So yes, we need to be focused on good diagnostic information getting back to a regular annual system of gathering information about student performance next year. But we also have to think beyond just those assessments to other ways of tracking whether students are staying connected to school, making learning progress, and doing well from a socio-emotional perspective.
Thank you. And then Chancellor Hall, what are some of the opportunities that have been presented by the school closures? How can states and districts use this opportunity to really think about equitable access for students with connectivity issues or lack of devices? And how do we create those long-term structures from here?
I think your first thing I would say is just recognizing that, while brick and mortar schools may have closed, schools themselves didn't close. Our district leaders and our superintendents and everyone involved, as well as our educators, again, they moved quickly to take learning over the course of what was an extended spring break by 1 week to pivot to distance learning, and doing that, quite quickly, with the 67 districts and the charter schools and others that we have in the state. They really turned on a dime. And that's just, again, I think a testament and a credit to our district leaders and many of them. And I think it's important to kind of point this out. Being Florida, we're no stranger to emergency disaster preparedness. When you think about hurricanes and things where we have had some of these conditions in place to kind of have our response systems ready to go, we had districts out there, Miami-Dade, and even some of our more rural districts, which were ready to pivot because they had instructional continuity plans already fully developed in the event they had a closure that they had to, respond to because of a hurricane or some other natural disaster. So we capitalized on that and worked with our districts and shared those best practices of what a good instructional continuity plan looks like, so that, again, they can move to using their virtual platforms that they were using locally, or building out the capacity of our Florida virtual school that now would have the capacity to serve, if needed, every student in the state of Florida, and offering training to all of our district teachers so that they could be trained to deploy curriculum and learning and the instructional needs through that system. So that was kind of some of our first initial steps. And so when you talk about opportunities, again, it's not that our schools closed, we just changed the way that learning was being deployed and what instruction looked like. And I think some of the opportunities that we're seeing from this is that, really shown for the first time that learning can extend beyond the classroom of a, traditional brick and mortar school. And I think that becomes a real opportunity long-term for accelerating some of the achievement gaps that we want to address, that it doesn't have to happen just during the traditional school day or just during the 180 days a year. How do we look at opportunities for extending those learning opportunities through these platforms and strategies that we've been deploying during this time? I think some of the other things that I would say that, came out of this, this disaster and this public health emergency is that it's really kind of, it's put a light on the additional subgroup of students that sometimes we just don't talk about, which are those that are impacted by the digital divide, those that don't have devices, those that don't have internet access. And it's really forced us to work, collectively with our districts and our business and, other leaders around the state to move quickly to get devices in the hands of students that didn't have them. Internally as a department, we moved to reallocate resources in our agency to deploy an additional 32,000 devices out to our rural districts. Oftentimes people think of Florida as beaches and big cities and amusement parks, and we have a lot of rural communities all across Florida. And with that, we had to work with them to say, okay, where are their gaps? And we deployed, again, over 32,000 devices to those areas that we knew had a need to get them in the hands of their students. Worked with a lot of our internet providers who stepped up to provide free internet service to families across the state for students that are in our K-12 system. We continue to work with them to make sure that where there's barriers, those areas are being addressed. Is it absolutely perfect? No, but I would say that we're good and getting better. And I think it's a testament, again, to our district leaders seeing where the gaps have existed, teachers stepping in to deploy curriculum and instruction in ways that mitigate some of the short-term losses that we're concerned about, but also seeing this as a pivotal point to say, how do we use this as a opportunity to extend learning into the next school year? And like everybody else, not only on this call and across this country, looking at how do we have these systems prepared in the event we have to use contact tracing to look at classrooms, schools, entire districts. Again, how do we make sure that we have the support systems in place in the event we have to pivot quickly to move from brick and mortar school, instruction to distance learning and virtual instruction, if and when those situations were to come back up. So I think for us, again, we're trying to look at how do we use this as an opportunity to get our statewide system prepared in the event of future, challenges. But again, we're just really proud of how our districts, our business partners, others have stepped up, being creative, again, like many other states, getting buses out in local communities with Wi-Fi access, taking every step possible to get hotspots set up in local homes. I just think, again, we're proud of the steps that have been made. And I think because we've had a strong system of support for emergency preparedness and response, we capitalized on that. We took what was a really strong virtual school system and we helped to expand that capacity. And really, again, grateful to our business leaders and others that stepped up in this time. And we're going to continue to build on that. And so just really proud of that work. Again, I want to thank our teachers, our school leaders, our superintendents. And we're going to take this summer, like everybody else, and look at how do we bridge and prepare for the new school year when we open our buildings back up, but knowing that, again, the learning is going to continue between now and then.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then I'm going to move to Commissioner Mcgrath. And Commissioner Mcgrath, can you talk about what Texas is doing to support distance learning with this focus on equity, including students who are academically at risk or in special education?
Yeah, there's a lot that's been going on. I'll focus on 4 narrow points. So we stood up an instructional continuity planning system for every school system in the state of Texas. There are 1,200 different school systems in Texas that have varying sizes and capacities, as you would imagine, given that scale and diversity. And so the instructional continuity framework was really designed to help districts think through all of the systems that need to be established to effectively support all learners in this new remote environment. In addition, Texas is the largest educator of rural school children in the United States. We have a huge number of kids in rural settings. And we heard from some of our smaller LEAs, our smaller school systems that did not have, like central curriculum and instruction departments. You hear these stories about superintendents in Texas that also are bus drivers, which is actually a true thing. It happens. And so we've stood up kind of a default set of options for them for remote curricular tools that can be executed, that were free, that we secured rights to and actually negotiated for folks who didn't have digital access. If they give us the home address of the parents, then we can direct ship these home learning packets to every single household in Texas. So work through all the logistics of that. It's available in both English and Spanish. So that's up at texashomeLearning.org. So option 1 is the district-driven instructional continuity plan. Option 2 is a sort of easy button option with a whole bunch of curricular resources already stood up, ready to go and ready to be supported by their teachers. The third key thing I think to mention, just in the area of special education alone, so we have an entire instructional continuity framework, special education component for everything that you can imagine that educators have to do to support students with whatever degree of individualized supports that are necessary in special ed. But for example, we created a tool and sort of pre-purchased it for the entire state for speech language pathologists. So as you can imagine, remote instruction for some aspects of special education are quite challenging. But speech therapy is actually very possible to happen with a decent level of effectiveness in a remote setting. So we made available a tool for every school system and for every kid that receives speech language therapies in Texas, about 250,000 kids with that one therapy, so that they can get this delivered with licensed speech pathologists regardless of the underlying geography. And the tool set actually automatically documents all the individual education plan progress monitoring components that are necessary during that time period. So that's scaled up within 24 hours. We had 100 districts sign up for it, and it's being scaled up, and that'll serve us well long after a time of COVID to provide the most effective speech language therapy supports to students in special education. So that's another of the sort of 4 kind of individual points worth mentioning. And the last one I think gets to the crux of the digital divide. So sort of an idea emerged simultaneously from multiple factors, but give credit where it's due. So Dallas began talking about this in a very loud way And the governor has, as a result, launched Operation Connectivity, which is designed to address the digital divide specifically for our kids in Texas, so that on a go-forward basis, every household has access to that has a family that students in public school has access to broadband and necessary devices. And we're using our central resources, and he's using the bully pulpit of the governor's office to drive through that issue, to address this issue of the digital divide, sort of right in center mass. So those are sort of 4 things that are happening among many others in Texas to get at the heart of the issue of equitable supports for all learners in a time of COVID.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful, and it seems like Texas is really doing a lot. And Commissioner Schwinn, as we think about next school year, what can happen at the state, district, and school level to think about student learning, and how is the state thinking about supporting the varying needs of all students?
Sure. So I think we spoke a little bit about some of the work that we're doing for different types of districts across the state. As we're thinking about reopening and then what that means for continuity of instruction throughout the year, we're also trying to take a pretty diverse approach, understanding that some of our districts might be in a distance and/or blended learning format, but that might not be true for other districts. And so a couple of things we're doing in the, we have 3 buckets in our strategic plan, and I think we've been trying to frame a lot of this additional work related to COVID in those same buckets. And the first is academics. So over the last 2 months, we've been able to broadcast from 1st through 8th grade a series of lessons in partnership with PBS. And those are available online. They're also available through regularly scheduled programming, and then also through radio. We have a number of families who don't have access to either television or the internet. And so we've been trying to find different solutions in that space. Over the summer, we're going to significantly expand the number of lessons and make sure that that's aligned to existing kind of scopes and sequences as they relate to individual districts, so that various districts are able to either access that online through YouTube channels. They're able to download those videos and actually upload them onto various devices and send those devices home so that it's internet agnostic, and a number of other things that we're doing through an online tool. But what we know we have to do is make sure that regardless of where the child is sitting, we know what an instructional day is, and we define that very clearly, and that the state has provided a suite of resources for districts to optionally use in an academic format. We do expect that many of our districts will be engaged in some kind of blended learning format going into the beginning of the year, and that means the students who are at home versus the students who might be in a more traditional classroom setting need to have equitable access, and that includes, like I said, access to lessons, to student work, the ability to have wellness checks, and certainly the ability to have any kind of accommodations met. For the earliest grades, and I think we haven't as a field spent enough time on what's near and dear to my heart, which is the pre-K through 2nd grade. And it's not just because I have 3 kids under the age of 9, but it's also something that I know it's much harder to do in that distance format. So we have a partnership with Ready Rosie, and those are very quick at-home things that can happen between parents and students, between teachers and students, to help build on literacy and mathematics skills for students across certainly grade levels, but really focused on those early ages. We'll be expanding the number of resources and a suite of resources that are available for our youngest learners, because we also know that if we do not get students to grade level proficiency in reading by 3rd grade, they're on a very, very different life track. And so we certainly in Tennessee do not want to forget about those youngest learners. Understanding a distance format makes it much harder to keep them progressing as we would want them to. So we're going to invest a lot of time in that space. Second, as it relates to mental health and whole child, we have the Child Wellbeing Task Force, and again, those are organizations across the state, superintendents. We have superintendent engagement groups, which represent each of the 8 regional areas of our state for academics, whole child, and educators. So they'll be all contributing to what it looks like to support reentry. We're putting out probably a series of 15 to 20 reopening toolkits for various areas, transportation, nutrition, but certainly one of those is mental health. And how do we think about that for students with different needs who have not had those needs addressed, or new needs that have emerged as a result of the pandemic. For educators, I talked a little bit about the work that we're doing for long kind of distance professional development for principals and teachers. We have an aspiring assistant principal network to support new leaders in the field. We know we have vacancies that come up every year. So imagine if you've never been a school leader, this is your first year, and now you're doing so in a very different climate than the one in which you were educated. And so we want to make sure that we're addressing those vacancies and some of those new folks coming on board. But last would be from a technology perspective. One of the first things that we did when we had to start engaging in the school closure conversation is we negotiated a number of contracts and renegotiated our contracts with existing vendors who were no longer providing services, so that we could either reuse the funds in a way that was going to be more helpful for our stakeholders, specifically our districts, and or so that we could actually have some level of cost savings, understanding we're all going to be hit with some pretty significant budget cuts nationally. So we did that work. But the second thing we did is we started negotiating with vendors related to computers and access. And so that's been happening over the last several weeks. We had a call yesterday with our superintendents to let them know that we now have computers that are available for under $200. They range from $150 to $180 per device as a statewide contract. We also have a number of bundling options that are now at a state contract level, so districts can very easily purchase and procure from that space. We think that with the CARES money, it means that our smaller districts who don't have as much bargaining power and purchasing power, they're now able to get much lower cost units that are also hotspot enabled, et cetera. Or they're able to get bundled units where they get the device as well as professional development, the setup of digital classrooms, et cetera. So we're trying to take kind of a broad approach so that whatever pathway districts select, whether it is a blended learning environment, distance learning, or in-person learning, that they're able to have not just the toolkits for reopening, but they're able to have the devices, professional development, and support and technical assistance in their continuity of instruction plans to implement well.
Thanks so much. And as we move on to our next question, we have about 15 minutes left. So once again, if you haven't submitted a question, please go ahead and do so we can try to get to it. And hopefully we will have time for as many as possible. And so we're going to try to move through these pretty quickly so that we can hit as many as we can. So I'm going to start this one. I'm going to ask Chancellor Hall to respond, and then maybe Commissioner Schwinn, if you have a couple thoughts, that would be great too. And what leading data or indicators is your state collecting and monitoring now and through the summer to better understand these academic needs and gaps for next year? And so Chancellor Hall, we'll start with you.
So I think there's a couple different ways. One is we're actually looking at collecting attendance. I mean, first is looking at the engagement of students and students that, as we talk with districts, who are those students that have not been engaged and that they've, in some cases, not been connected to the curriculum and the instruction and learning that's taking place kind of through this virtual, platform that's being used at the local level. I think another part of it is that we've had districts step up because most of our districts are using some type of progress monitoring tool. And so many of them are actually continuing to deploy that progress monitoring tool virtually and giving students the opportunity to take that to kind of see where they're at this point in time during the year. And our districts, because, we do, really empower the local control, many of them are using things like the reading allocation funds to have these tools available to use in their schools. But now they're just allowing those tools to be used in many cases for students to take it home to, again, kind of monitor their progress and look at that information. So over the summer, as we, have summer programs, we are looking at, steps that we can take to really explore summer programs operating, looking at our summer VPK opportunities right now. We want to work with our Office of Early Learning, which is a part of our department, and how we phase in some of these options going forward. So we're working closely with our districts around that. And then through that, we'll collect data and kind of use that as a benchmarking for where we prepare for the fall. But like everybody else on the call, we're looking at the assessments that we have available and the information that we can use. And then we'll work with our districts on a local level to help them track that data and use that in a way that's responsive to the individual needs of our students. But I think the big one is going to be here initially, where have we lost track of students during this time as we move to this virtual learning and kids that have been disengaged in some cases for far too long going into the summer.
Thank you. And Commissioner Schwinn, do you have anything to add to that one?
I mean, I think the only things that we would add, and certainly Florida's been a leader in this space, is, I think you spoke, Chancellor Hall, to the hurricanes and all sorts of things that set that up. In Tennessee, we are moving very quickly to be able to be in that space. Two things that we are doing. So one is certainly looking at next year. We have two major research studies that are already underway that will start to collect a significant amount of data and be able to give us some information on what's happened and what that looks like. But I think second is we modified our educator survey. So typically we have about 70 to 78% of educators, and that includes principals assistant principals, et cetera, who participate in a survey. And it is a perception survey, but it gives us information on how people are thinking, responding, and the actions they're taking. We edited that survey this year, so it includes a series of questions related to the response to COVID-19, which will give us a really good set of data about what our teachers experienced, what actions they took, and how they're feeling both about this year and re-entry into the school year next year. And that also includes a number of questions that have to do with some of our special populations and technology. And so we think that's going to be really good for us for our forward planning. And then the third thing is that we have a couple of in-kind contributions for ways that we can model and do some predictive analytics related to how our students are progressing and how much loss there is. We were hit with tornadoes right before, so we have some students who haven't been in school since the beginning of March. So we're looking at 6 months of missed instruction in a traditional classroom format. And so we've been very lucky to have partners who are looking at some of those early indicators for some of our most severely hit districts across the state. And that includes, I think, to your point earlier, things like work completion, work assignments, number of minutes of engagement with an educator, and then some of the demographics within various communities about what resources are and frankly are not available given where the student lives. And so that information will all be to schools to help them construct instruction that is best suited for all of their individual children.
Thank you. And then moving on, Secretary King, I would love for you to kind of give a little bit of a national perspective to this question, and then Commissioner Mcgrath, if you can follow up with Texas one. But do you anticipate that states are going to, need to amend their ESSA plans and, really to account for these challenges that we've had in delivering academic content and assessments post-COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, certainly states are going to need to make adjustments to what they had planned to do, given that we didn't have assessments this year. There were a number of provisions of ESSA that were addressed in the CARES Act to create some flexibility for states. I think, to take it maybe a notch higher, I would say, as folks think about that, the question is, how do we come back to something that is better than the status quo ante, right? The inequities that we're seeing today existed before COVID-19. So getting back to where we were actually isn't good enough. The question is, how do we get to a place that is much more equitable? And that, these are 3 state leaders who are all thinking every day about this, but we've got to think in terms of solving the digital divide issues, because that will make us better prepared for the fall and future emergencies, but also because we know technology can be a useful tool to support learning, and all kids should have access to the internet. All kids should have access to devices that they can use to do their work. We've seen that districts that had a strong, high-quality curriculum in place were better positioned to navigate this period, but we actually know from the evidence that a high-quality curriculum that reflects the science of learning improves student outcomes. So we ought to be thinking about how do we, at a state level, support good curriculum work across all of the districts. We know that some districts were better positioned for this transition because their teachers had experienced professional development around integrating technology and using those curricula effectively to support student success. So we ought to be thinking about what will the state do to use stimulus dollars, existing state and local dollars to support high quality professional development around high quality curricula going forward. So I hope that in districts, folks are designating a team to think about what the future looks like, what the fall looks like in terms of navigating public health issues, but also how do we move forward from this moment in a way that accelerates student progress, closes these equity gaps that existed pre-COVID-19.
And Commissioner Mcgrath, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Not really. I think John summed it up pretty effectively. I mean, we had a strategic plan before. Aspects of that were captured in our ESSA plan. The new reality that we are faced with requires us to adapt and iterate on it, but so much of learning comes down to quality curriculum and well-supported educators. So that aspect of our strategic plan continues. We just have to figure out how to ensure that the tooling that we provide works in this new environment for both in-person and remote, whether synchronous or asynchronous.
Thanks. And moving on to another question, I'm going to direct this one to Secretary King and maybe quickly from Chancellor Hall also. Once we've identified how to assess learning loss, how do we serve the students who have been identified as having the highest needs? What do we do? And how will a focus on equity guide your decision-making or state's decision-making as we move towards the fall? And I'll start with Secretary King.
Yeah, well, one key issue is going to be are the resources there that folks need. And, you know, we have to consider that school districts and states are looking at huge revenue losses as a result of the COVID-19 economic crisis. And, you know, certainly if they had trust, our view is that Congress needs to step up here with a very significant investment in the next stimulus bill in state stabilization dollars that will help protect school districts from huge cuts. I was talking to a state chief last week who is telling his districts to anticipate a 30% cut in state aid. That'll just be devastating. That will mean loss of programs, layoffs. So first, we got to have the resources. We also have been arguing that Congress ought to set aside dedicated funds to support extended learning time. Starting with this summer, which may be through distance learning, may be through in-person, depending on public health considerations. Extended learning time next school year, that may mean staggered schedules, adapting the school day to provide more after-school learning time, may mean changing the way school is structured to create time for intensive tutoring. We have really good evidence that intensive tutoring can help students make rapid progress. We have to rethink how we organize ourselves in order to support that. Certainly extended learning time into summer 21 may be necessary. There are also ways to rethink teacher assignment. So if you have a strong teacher who might loop with students, so they had those students in third grade this year, third grade was cut in half because of COVID-19, maybe that should be the teacher who then works with those students in fourth grade next year so they can more quickly transition into getting back to the core academic work. Again, that requires a strong teacher who wants to loop, but there may be some opportunities there. Certainly, we're going to need interventions for students with disabilities and English learners who may not have gotten the services they need over the course of the school closure. So this is another reason why school districts need to have that team in place to plan for next year, and they will probably need time this summer for intensive professional development for teachers to plan for what will be a very different school year designed to help students get back into the structure of school, address socio-emotional needs, and address the academic learning loss.
Thank you. And Chancellor Hall, anything to add there?
No, I think the Secretary covered it pretty well, but I will just kind of extend a couple thoughts. Using the progress monitoring data, and once we have that information, we want to, to Commissioner Schwinn's comment earlier, third grade is going to be critical. We want to look at what we can do to mitigate the learning loss and look at literacy. I think we're going to, make big bets on our teachers and build their capacity and look at where we have those teachers that, show signs of being able to accelerate learning and get them in front of the students that maybe have the greatest need. So putting again those teachers that have proven success, have used the data, get them in front of the students that we think are showing signs based on that early diagnostics, getting them in front of those teachers and being able to bridge that, bridge those strategies and those interventions in that way with a high degree of intentionality. But I think it's like anything else. How do we build the capacity of our teachers, our school leaders in this time? And that's where we're going to make a lot of focus around those early stage efforts, using that data, drive instruction with the data to improve the practice of teaching and learning. And I think that's where we're going to have to remain focused. I don't think it's necessarily, some, super secret out there. You put great teachers with the right tools and the right resources, they're going to make the magic happen. Now we just got to figure out how do we double down on that in a way that closes those gaps at an accelerated rate.
Thanks. And I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to direct this one towards Commissioner Schwinn. You spoke earlier about early learners, and we have a question about assessment for those younger groups for whom reading and math aren't an appropriate accountability measure right now. How do we assess those young learners in a developmentally appropriate way?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And specifically, I think it varies whether or not the student is going to be in a traditional setting versus the child's at home. So certainly, I don't think there's an expectation where parents at home are assessing their children. I think we are moving into a space, though, where we need to make sure that every child, regardless of where their learning is taking place, has access to high quality instructional materials, has access to high quality instruction in literacy, and that there are very quick and easy ways in which parents can monitor their child's progress so that when and if those children are able to come back into a traditional school setting, we have our regular literacy and math diagnostics that we give to students along the way throughout the year. So I think I would answer that less so in the traditional classroom format, because I think we have some pretty good ways in which we do that work. And I would say more at home. And that's when we have resources like Ready Rosie. The state of Tennessee is going to be producing a series of early learning resources for specifically for families, as well as things that can be used in classrooms. But that's, again, these quick checks around your student should be able to know all the letter names. Your student should be able to know all of his or her letter sounds. And then there's also a couple of resources that we'll be putting out where parents could actually do some literacy instruction at home, paired with some of the free videos that we'll be putting up through PBS as well as online. So we're trying to have a kind of everything and approach, as opposed to saying this is the one way to do it, knowing some of our parents have very different kind of feelings of confidence around instruction and literacy, different languages that might be spoken at home, and different kind of time constraints related to work, et cetera. So we're taking that approach, but it is something that I think as a field, I will just put in a plug, we need to be talking a lot more about. We're spending a lot of time talking about, I think, a number of things, but those early learners are the ones that they're hardest to reach in a lot of ways, and there's a lot on the line for them if we do not get them where they need to be within those first 3 years of traditional schooling.
Thank you so much for that response, and thank you to everyone who participated. We had a lot of questions popping in and out, so I'm really excited to dig into them later. So thank you to Commissioner Schwinn, Secretary King, Commissioner Mcgrath, and Chancellor Hall for joining us today. This was such an interesting conversation. We're really sorry if you weren't able to submit a question, but we think we maybe have found a solution. We are going to try to do a Twitter town hall this Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern, where we're going to answer some of the questions that we missed today and try to get that information to you, because we really want them to be want these webinars to be as useful as possible. We will post a recording of this presentation as well as key takeaways in a blog format on our Hunt Institute blog later this week. It will also have information about our other webinars that we've already hosted, as well as videos for those. We have been working really hard to compile as many resources and provide as many opportunities as we can. And we have a host of webinars and materials and issue briefs coming up. So we have on Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern, a higher education philanthropic priorities in the age of COVID-19. And then on Thursday, the 21st, we have the state chiefs from Missouri, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, as well as our own Dr. Javed Siddiqui, who will be joining for that call. And then later on June 4th at 2 p.m. Eastern, we have Colorado, New Mexico, and New York state chiefs joining us. We also have, like I mentioned, a bunch of issue briefs, issue briefs and other resources and state trackers on our COVID-19 landing page. The link is right there. So last thing I just want to point out really quickly is we've had a lot of requests for all the information from the Conversations with State Chiefs pages to be available, to be available in one place. And so we are going to have a live link coming up soon at this web address that will have all of our blog recaps, all of our videos, everything all there right together, as well as any resources that are mentioned, to really try to make it as easily accessible for you as possible. And so with that, the last thing I'll say is that once this webinar is over, you'll be brought to a brief survey, and it's just going to be asking about your experience today. And thank you again for joining us. Thank you to all of our panelists, and we will see you Monday, May 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern for our higher education webinar. Thanks so much, and have a great day.